right, we're ready. I will call this Committee of the Whole Finance meeting to order. I have a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. Moved by Councillor Weekwood, seconded by Councillor Ryan. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. And we have no delegations, so we'll move right into new business. The first one is a request for decision on the backhoe selection lease. Everybody could look at the documentation and we'll get a little rundown.
I should have called that request for recommendation to council as we're in a crowd meeting. I'll hand over to Glenn in a moment, just giving you the basics here. The three heavy equipment suppliers have provided a response to the village backhoe tender. Finning, which is Caterpillar, Great Western, Volvo, Brandt, John Deere. The lowest price was Ultra Finland with at $114,500 and a $15,000 trade-in. There's no pricing was offered in pre-owned inventory, which was a little disappointing. And I brought the full packages up for any detailed questions. Glenn, your thoughts?
Yeah, if we decide to go ahead with it, there's nothing wrong with the John Deere at all. There's nothing really wrong with any of those three brands. And I compared all the, I don't know if you've got that, where I put them all together, the three different ones.
Just the pricing.
Okay, I did actually compare them all, and they are so similar, it's unbelievable. In specs and everything. So there's no reason not to go with the John Deere that I'm aware of.
Councillor Ryan?
Motion, for the motion out to accept the tender from John
So
Deere.
that accept the recommendation.
A recommendation.
Any
I
discussion?
recommend to council that we accept the tender.
Any discussion? And that's on the basis of, arranging the 5-year, which would be, that's what the motion, the recommendation here reads. So
Yes.
you're happy with that, okay?
Yep.
Just wanted to clarify, because
No,
what we're
that's
talking.
fine.
Yeah. All right. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor? Motion is carried.
Your earlier motions at council on the subject of doing the 10-year AP lease still stand, but we have to initiate the 5-year agreement to switch over later. So it's basically it's a strange thing. You basically fill out the paperwork for the 5-year scenario, and then if you still want to go down the 10-year road and do an AP on reducing the annual debt servicing, we do that after we've signed on the line for the fund.
Okay. So it'll happen regardless. All right.
But question, but we're not obligated to go that route.
No.
The next item is the boat launch. Remaining take on that.
Yeah, we have set it up with TP Mountain, I believe, to come back because they're to oversee the installation on April 1st.
Okay.
It should be a one-day thing.
It's a joke, right?
No,
April
I
Fool's
hope
Day.
it's not.
We don't find it. Yeah.
It should go very smooth this time. Everything's in place, and there's no earthwork to really do. Just start placing them, so it shouldn't be a problem.
So what is, if you see water projection, lake level, projected powers, April 1st is still going to be on? Because it's way down, it's lower now than
It's no, but in the fall, yes, but it does go lower. I went down and I was talking to Marty, and we kind of seemed to be the most knowledgeable. And I couldn't see any forecasts, longer range ones like that from Fortis, so went with Marty, his history down there, and felt that was probably
good.
the right time.
Any other questions for Glenn on that one?
So the money that we budgeted, that last year, is that going to cover it?
We've already purchased all the in-water stuff, like all the stuff to get us up to the high water mark,
Mhm.
and then some. And we have budgeted another 5,000 for this year, and that's to do work above, because we don't have to use those slabs, we can just use poured concrete or possibly asphalt there. We don't have the same issues to worry about.
Okay.
All right, we'll move on to the next item, the dam project residual. Do you have a report on that?
No, essentially for budgetary purposes, the 20% has to be covered by the municipality and to be transferred from reserve or to be for by other means this year. And that's the figure that I put on the blade that I got Carol to give me a specific figure, just to clarify how much it is. It does sort of add to the consideration we were giving to deferring the avenue to 2015, because of course the plan there was to draw from the reserve, the water reserve for the E Avenue project as well. So that's just a note of caution of drawing too much from the reserve all at once.
I'd like to recommend that we recommend to council that we pull that money out of the waterworks reserve, given other budgetary considerations we have this year, that we don't want to put it on general taxation.
I'll move that.
By Councillor Bigford, seconded by Councillor Lang. Any discussion?
So just, if we're deferring a tax hit until 2015 on this, does it make any sense to split it? Maybe do half this year and half next year? Is that, or is it?
What do you think on that, Carol? Or does it make any difference, or is it better to get that all dealt with now?
Well, the fire hall probably won't come into full force until a year or two,
Mm-hmm.
so maybe the sooner the better. Keeps it all in there.
But this money's coming from the waterworks reserve,
Yes.
so it's got nothing to do with,
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah.
It's already sitting in reserve. We're just pulling it out of the waterworks reserve.
Okay, so what I heard was that this is part of the money that was also going to be thrown on to do the AM.
Well, no, the plan from last year had been to pull about $50,000 from reserve to do the Avenue water line. However, in past discussions in the last few weeks, many people want to defer A Avenue water line. So it means essentially we're not drawing too much from reserve all at once.
We still have something left in the waterworks reserve,
Oh,
I
I
think a
think-
reasonable amount if we had an issue.
I think it's fair.
Oh yes, no, it's a fairly healthy reserve, yes, yes.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Okay, Water Street and City Hall use of gas tax funds.
Okay, now this is running around out of time to actually give you anything for to look at. Basically, I've had a look at other gas tax projects using the community works funds over the last few years in BC. And what I realised was that the community works funds can be used to help fairly large but multifaceted downtown revite projects, as long as they're fulfilling certain objectives about active transportation and wastewater and so on. And we've been looking at how to best use gas tax money. So I came to the conclusion, looking at the other projects that had been funded in other jurisdictions under existing criteria, that just about everything other than the paving itself was probably eligible under gas tax funds. So on top of the lighting project that we've been budgeting for using gas tax funding. Anything to do with wastewater, the curb, any kind of path works. So basically we could reduce the tax portion of that project and either use some, have some additional savings or devote some more tax resources to City Hall should the worst happen with grant applications this year.
Councillor Leaper?
So we could use that for the curb and gutter,
Mm-hmm.
not paving.
It's basically, from what I've seen on the other downtown revite projects, everything except the actual paving of the road. You can, of course, because vehicles are going to travel on the road is fair game.
Councillor Lang?
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the process. So would we go ahead and expend the money and hope that it would qualify, or do you?
Oh no, we have gas tax resources under those old criteria as deferred revenue already.
Oh, I understand that.
So no, it would basically you would report it as a downtown revitalisation project and show how much came from tax base for the project and which deliverables that work with the criteria were also expended. If say we stuck with our original projections of the paving costing, what was it, Glenn? Was it in the 60,000
That sounds right.
plus kind of vicinity? It would mean that everything else that we're budgeting for could potentially be drawn as part of our gas tax downtown revite project.
So, but is there somebody sitting somewhere that would look at the application, see
Yeah,
that this qualifies as
Well, no, it's usually audited after the fact.
after the fact?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd just like to make a suggestion at this point before we decide on which route to take is have you come back with a report on the budget for Water Street and, you know, where the sources of funds, what we've currently got in reserve and for that paving, plus, you know, I know you've already done one on the use of gas tax and the identified projects, but just so we're clear on all the aspects.
I think that will help for clarity too.
So-
Just in relation to those activities as well, today we had Scott Wallace and is it Norm DeVerney in town to look at a number of issues. One being Water Street, and what's clear is that the paving project on the street itself can go forward. There are no major concerns there. We've got some very straightforward advice on road grade and stormwater management. But in years to come, we may be looking at getting a quota on a slope stabilisation plan for the area below. It's nothing of severe concern at this point in time, but there's enough there that we probably should have a plan in place for Public Works to do what they can over time, in line with the plan.
So is everyone fine with waiting to make a decision until we get the information at the next meeting then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, when are you going to start the curb and gutter? Is that the first step, or is it underground the first step?
I will be the underground first.
Yeah. When do you think that's going to take place? After April 1st?
Yeah. Probably right after.
So as long as that's not an impediment to the works crew getting the project going.
I'm just looking at when the next budget meeting is. It's on March 27th. Is our next finance meeting. Is that doable?
I think that should be.
I won't
So-
be here.
Oh, that's right. You're away.
So we can, you know, if we were provided with all the information, we could conceivably
Okay.
decide
Okay.
on that at that meeting and know where how to proceed.
One related piece of advice we got today, which I think was quite good advice, was that we were not being encouraged to put any substantial or heavy manufactured pieces on the area of Water Street that was planned to be a landscaped area with a park. I think maximum we're looking at a gravel pathway
Yeah.
that would not be maintained in the winter. Is that right, Glenn? I think that was
Yeah.
We'll get something in writing from them, but that seemed to be the guidance.
And what about in regard to City Hall, to address Water Street, what about City Hall?
Well, we're currently budgeting about it's over $100,000 in potential match funding for a project for City Hall this year. What we've not really addressed is the scenario of what if we're unsuccessful. We could still execute a number of particularly useful projects to get the building on the way. Chris Temple has certainly identified a lot of the projects that need to be done. So, in essence, I mean, I don't want to use the term black hole or anything like that, but basically any additional money, even though it is a tight year for the municipality, that we can put towards City Hall will probably be well used on a particular project here and there. And I think I've also got there's also an engine on the question of the library's request.
Is the removal of the city hall, the old fire?
That's the next one. That's the next item. All right, so is everyone comfortable moving on to the next item, which is the fire hall demolition retention discussion? So that was in regard to the library's request that we keep that there for potential future use for themselves. Councillor Lang?
I'm not in favor of that simply because I don't know where the money comes to renovate that building. It doesn't fit with the character of the City Hall. I think, and from prior discussions, that there's certainly potential for them to occupy some of the space on the main floor or even possibly on the second floor. So my vote would be to have the building removed.
Councillor Leewood?
Well, if we were to do that, before we do anything, we'd have to get the building sprinkled, which is, well, it was 17,000 quite a few years ago, about 4 years ago now. So that would be a cost that would be borne by the village, because it's our building, right? So as much as I would like to support the library having extra space, I think that it's always been in the plan to take that fire hall off there as part of our plan to renovate City Hall, and I think it's hard enough for us to find funds to renovate the actual City Hall. And we probably would be needing to put more money into that if we did allow the library. So I support what Councillor Lang said.
So I'm just going to make a motion that we pursue the demolition of the fire hall.
Plans for demolition?
Plans?
Well, yeah, because we're not demolishing it yet, but to make it public that we still plan to have it.
And it's been budgeted for, right?
Yeah, we're budgeting for it.
Okay, so there's a motion, seconded by Councillor Lang. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Motion is carried.
I'd like to make a subsequent motion, if I could. I think we should consider a way. We should seek proposals on developing that area into a green space, and probably the sooner the better we start on that. Because once the building starts coming down, I assume that the slab will be removed and everything. I don't want to just, it's a bad spot for a vacant lot. So even if we had some kind of proposal on what ultimately is going to happen, or even in the short term, we just plant grass or whatever, but at least, because the community, it's going to be a bit of an eyesore. People are going to wonder what you're doing. So I think we should go ahead and do some kind of process, put out a little proposal for a green space.
Do that plan.
Yeah, I have a plan.
Just for information, the the latest discussions we've had with the fire department indicates that it seems unlikely they'll be out of there before, I think it was August. I don't know. Again. Which again means that and we've had indication from the federal government that we can't expect a decision for June on that application. Carol and I will be having some discussions with Linda McClure on a CBT application in April. Yes, there are certain projects we have to move forward on, and I think we can incorporate this somehow.
So the motion is to maybe staff would give us a recommendation on how to go about planning? Or do we want to put it, advertise the community, or?
A request for expressions of interest in developing the space with I think a staff report might be advisable, just to provide some criteria for what council would like to see in that space. Not specifying exactly what the parameters might be, or the limitations, structures and so on.
So that just be a direction to staff then, rather than any form of motion at this point? Councillor Lieber?
Well, I was just going to, I'm just wondering if we should approach the library and ask them if, we need to write them a letter to explain why we are not supporting that, but maybe there's a way that they could do something that was a standalone thing on that spot, rather than us going ahead and developing something else without asking. There may be funds for them to do something that is different than having that building. I just don't want to totally not give them an opportunity to do something with that space, because they do need more space for the library. So it can't be the fire hall, but maybe they could get funds to build something else that's on that spot instead.
I think it's problematic if it's going to be a standalone building. I don't know how that really benefits so many more than being in the building where they're at and using more space. And if it gets connected to the building, then that compromises the whole heritage character where we're going. We just turn around, we go backwards and stick something on it again, or we just take it off.
Look, at one time on the plan that, I don't know if it was actually on the plan, but there was a drawing included in the City Hall drawings that we got from the architect that did have like a solarium sort of thing there. Mm-hmm. So I just don't want us to move forward without explaining to the library our reasoning and giving them an opportunity that maybe they could try and think of something alternative. I think your idea about the park is good, but...
Well, it makes me a little nervous if we get into this position again, or I've seen this happen somewhere else, where you invite somebody to make a proposal, they do a whole bunch of work, they sink resources into it, they come back with an idea about building an addition outside that building, and maybe we decide we don't want an addition on that building. So I think before you invite somebody to make a proposal, something like that, you want to decide whether building an addition on that building is...
Well, I don't see it as an addition, because we don't want to connect it. That's the whole reason why we're... But anyway, it was just a thought of it.
Councillor Lang?
Yeah, I'd just like to know how much space they're looking for to begin with, and where that, and then how that might dovetail into the plans of restoring the City Hall itself. To me, that's step one. If we can sort of determine whether there's adequate space there for them in the existing building, then we could move on to discussions of other structures if it's on there, the two ideas are incompatible. But I have a suspicion that there's probably adequate space for them inside the existing building if it was shared correctly. So, but I'd just like to hear from them in terms of what they're, I don't know in the presentation, did they ever identify as to how much square footage they were actually looking for?
I don't recall. So, would you like to have them invited to a regular committee of the whole, but write them a letter in advance explaining, where we're at with having it removed, and we want to discuss further what their space requirements might be to see if it would be a fit for utilizing parts of City Hall, just to open a discussion with them so they can come prepared?
Yeah, I wasn't thinking of anything quite that formal. I just thought an exchange of letters was probably sufficient at this stage of the game. But if you want to invite them as a delegation, I don't object to that. I just thought maybe.
What do you advise?
The other approach would be to explain that the village is moving forward with demolition and to invite the library to help form the expression of interest, solicitation of ideas for the use of the space.
Yeah.
To help that they could assist with defining the parameters of the use for the space, perhaps to their advantage.
I just think that without attaching, with your proposal of putting another building without it being attached, we can't do it because we can't have two structures unless it's a, or could we have two structures on our own property, on a single property? I thought unless it was just a garage or something, you can't, that it has to be adjoined,
You've
but.
got limiting distances and different
Right.
things like that, because that's not a fire protected, well, it's a wooden, I
Right.
don't think you get away with, you have to be so far away that it wouldn't be on the same property.
Okay.
Also septic issues.
Yeah.
Never mentioned sewer.
I think the problem with the second floor of the city hall with the library space is the accessibility.
Right.
But anyway, that sounds like a good idea to do.
All right. So then for you, well, I guess we're not going to do anything until after it goes to the regular council meeting, but we have a plan. All right. The next item is the 5-year plan. And that proposed template. There's an A and a B. What's the difference?
Yes, well, it's just one is Schedule A and one is Schedule B of the bylaw. Now, some municipalities, I'd say larger than ours, also do quite elaborate documents on their 5-year plan to accompany the bylaw. But I was again victim of the word perfect. The word perfect version of 10 years ago, and used the opportunity to restructure and rebuild how we put it together in terms of what you see in the bylaw there. I have within it, we have certain degrees of latitude in terms of how we structure the financial plan, in terms of heading and so on. For clarity, I'm moving forward with identifying the areas of federal government grant revenue, provincial government grant revenue, regional district and central Kootenai revenue that's returned to the village for specific reasons, so that that's broken out and clearly identified moving forward. And also I've got there for basically how we break out appropriation from specific reserves. Our past financial plans were a little more general in terms of how these things were done. There was a lot of agglomeration, which was all fine, nothing wrong with that. However, certain issues we've run into recently have kind of shown the benefit of having a little bit more detail without going mad in terms of the level of detail, so that we can see from year to year where things are coming from and where they're going. Just moving down in there. On Schedule B. This is the area where I think Council has a lot of room for some discussion in the next few weeks. Policy and objectives, Schedule B of the bylaw. Our obligations are to show how our financial plan is going to disperse across various areas of revenue source and property tax base. But it's an opportunity for the municipality that wants to get creative to provide some very clear policies. The areas in red that you see, I took from another one just for illustration purposes. They're fairly generic in nature. Property value tax is the primary source, etc., etc. Objectives and to have objectives and policies, just basic commitments that you see there. Seek grants for major infrastructure, annual review utility rates, to complete the implementation of water meters. That was another one, I think, where it was going residential. To review all other services to determine optimal proportions for cost recovery from fees. and to establish reserve policies to assist in the funding of future capital replacement. You can get quite lengthy with this, you can get shorter. If there are some objectives and policies that you'd like to see built into the bylaw, it's a good place to put it. I can certainly incorporate those objectives and policies into subsequent annual reports so that we start to get a fairly seamless link between what's there and what we're saying to the community in terms of activities that were done over the course of the year, or overriding financial policies as well. I'm just presenting it to you at the moment. We'll get some numbers in there before too long now, but just for your consideration. Another area, if I scroll further down, Part C, the use of permissive tax exemptions. Municipalities vary quite widely on what they say. This is a fairly standard statement that you see there, but you as a council have committed to have a look at the permissive tax exemptions, I think in July again. So maybe not this year that you'll want to look at the language in there, but maybe in a future year, a future council will want to restructure the language around the use of permissive tax exemptions. Now that's a statutory obligation that you state what your policy on that is. So it can either be done. It can either be a very brief piece or it can be a lengthy one. And so, if you have any thoughts on it in the next little while, let me know. Because policy is not regulation or anything, but it kind of sets out where you see things going and what principles you want to state to be created.
Do you have any, would you be able to get from communities that are somewhat similar size, what kind of...
Some examples?
Yeah, just because
Yeah,
we're basically starting from scratch as far as as far as council being involved in this part. I think that it's always just been done. We've not been asked for input on this section of the financials that I could recall since I've been on council. So I would find it helpful to have some examples of what other communities do on their financial plans.
Okay. One very elaborate version I did come across was, I don't know how big their population is, the village of Lundy have a very large annual financial plan document. They already have their 2014 one set out on their website. I can certainly provide that one, but I'll provide a series of examples so that you can see the range, and it is quite diverse.
So shouldn't this be linked to our priorities? So is there some way to kind of put the two on the same document? Because it seems like we identify our priorities, but we don't really think like ahead or project.
Well, for example, if I take the fairly basic ones that you've got there on that example and right to actively seek grants for major infrastructure repair and replacement, well, you've got that would apply to City Hall, Marsden to Water Street if we're using one more gas tax revenue, AMU water line if we're pursuing federal funds for that. So it's basically saying this is one method by which we will repair and replace our infrastructure.
But having it written on there. Like, so if we're going to get a copy of this in some form, having, that exact thing you said under that heading, for me would help, because I think you kind of lose sight when you look at it in a different way of what it is you want to do with it.
So maybe what might be helpful then in a case like that is if there was just one more, like you've written comments on Schedule B, saying on the line there could be a comment that if there was an increase in expenditures over 5 years or decrease any significant variances, that maybe this just to note that there's significant variances, we just get a brief, that loan's paid off or whatever it is,
I mean, for example, under Part B there, the gorilla in the room this year, of course, is the regional district fire hall. So you would maybe want to provide some contextual rationale around why you're doing what you're doing in relation to what the regional district are doing to try and keep taxes, and try and keep taxes as low as possible without giving up the municipality's ability to move forward on other projects for the community. Basically setting that out quite clearly. That would certainly, I look at it as given that I didn't have an electronic file I could work with, it's an opportunity to kind of structure this for the first time, and it will help inform me as I build annual reports moving forward in the years to come, because I can trace it back to the financial plan and other policies that we're setting as you go along. I'll give this out now. I wasn't sure if these are the priorities set from January. You'll see that we haven't really strayed too far yet from anything.
Other budget matters, is there anything else that's, just whether Glenn can leave now, if there's anything else that he's required for?
I think we're good. Glenn must be.
You
We're
must
lucky
be
he's still sitting there.
not under the table sleeping?
No, you're good.
They're dazed, but
Well, thank you for saving our
Yes.
citizens of Caslo, so they can make coffee this
there
morning.
should be a letter
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
You've identified the priorities you see there. There's only two real question marks, and one was the Avenue water line priority, and the other was the foreshore and water zoning project, both of which now apparently there isn't such a degree of urgency over either of them, although the A Avenue water line remains an infrastructure priority for the community. I know the Catholic Church in particular would like to see that project happen, because they've got some other related needs connected to that, but it appears to be all right for the time being.
Are we ready to move on to the next item? Okay, and that's the post-election workshops circular.
This is the next council
Yeah.
line.
Right, Gordon.
To be honest, I wasn't really too sure what to do with this. It was sent to me, but it's really whether this is something that we want to book for the next council or not. But we would have to budget for it this year.
That's really good.
Well, when does the council change? It's December. Would you be doing it in December? There's only one council meeting. So wouldn't we do it maybe in January and then budget for it next year?
We could not really exactly the way he hasn't provided any dates.
Well, in his email, he said he was booking up, but we'd still have to make a booking, which would be basically.
It would be December. Because you'd have to wait for council to change.
Yeah, I think this would be a very extensive undertaking just for Village Caslo to do. It should be done probably a group of small municipalities. I know that opens up a big giant can of worms around scheduling and everything, but if it was shared between, and then maybe possibly this might even go through maybe the regional district, maybe through the regional district, some sort of organization, something where the municipalities pull together and you could use the regional district office or whatever, something like that. I don't see us doing this on our own. I think it's too expensive. I think it'd be great, highly productive, but I think we need to have partners to do something like this. Doesn't make much sense for 4 people to sit through. This is very comprehensive process. I went through this at the regional district, the Court of McIntosh, not too long ago, probably a month or 6 weeks ago. Very similar to this. And it's in depth.
Yeah, some of us, we did, when did we do it, about 3 years ago? 4 years ago?
It was, yeah, I think it was longer ago, because were you on council when we had it?
I think so, yeah. And we just brought him in just ourselves.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
was, I don't remember it being the kind of prices I'm seeing here.
No, I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
Because it involved, staff had a day,
Yeah.
and then council was in the evenings.
Oh, but that was strategic, more strategic planning, wasn't it? I
Some
remember
of the
that
stuff
session.
we talked about here, we did.
Yeah, priority setting and
Strategic
governance,
planning,
and, yeah,
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 yeah, I guess it was it, yeah.
Yeah.
From-
yeah, definitely, the
Yeah, operation strategies and objectives.
Well, maybe it is something you want to do just as a small group then.
because I think it'd be difficult for each group. It would be an extended session, because for each group to be able to sit with them and identify their priorities, because he'd have to meet with the individual staffs, because staff was part of the process last time, so the cost savings might not be recognized, and he might not have time to do more than a session just for one community. This looks like a 2-day thing, but yes, we definitely did it on our own.
So what's
And it
the
covered the
cost
same
on this,
ground.
like $5,500 or something like that?
Close, 39, 51, 50, and
And then lunches and dinners and reports.
Accommodation,
In
travel.
addition,
Yeah,
accommodation.
so-
It's gonna be,
then 5,000 to 6,000.
yeah, close, probably closer to 6,000. If you have counselors that are experienced, I think something like this could be highly productive. If it was all, just as an example, all a green council, I don't know that this wouldn't kind of be a little bit, they'll still be trying to figure out what it is to be a council. It's likely a little bit behind that.
Way too soon.
For a year or two.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's better for year two, I think, if it's a green council.
Right, or late spring in,
Mhm.
right after the budget was complete for next year, like
Mhm.
about this time next year,
Yeah.
because then they've got a few months and have gone through budgeting and, at least have some meetings and stuff, so, yeah.
Could I respond to them and suggest mid-2015 then, or something like that? Or
And you won't be able to make a commitment as this
No,
council,
no,
so
no.
you couldn't commit anything,
No.
continue until the new council. It could be the first meeting.
So the municipal fiscal year is December 31st?
Yes.
we could budget for it in a 5-year plan and have the new, if the new council doesn't like it, it can be taken out.
Right.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
All right. Then, the last item is other budget matters.
Yes, I have one for you. Here you go. This just popped off the press. This one came in. It's a little bit of a surprise. I thought you'd be on to say. Phase 1 of liquid waste management plan is approved. Therefore, when we get a chance to draw our breath, we can move to requests for expressions of interest and framing terms of reference for phase 2. At the moment, we've allocated a very rough figure of, I think, $25,000 in gas tax for this, but we can refine that figure through an expression of interest process. I've been given some names in terms of people who could assist us with the financial end questions over developing sewer system from what it is now to something something larger over time, and how to try and get the best of both worlds for everybody before moving to the major questions of with an engineer, the engineering firm, what is the refined future vision of the capital works involved. So it's really two linked but separate areas of consultation. One the financial end, the other the engineering solution. I think it seems to be a question that doesn't go away. I can understand why there's people that want to get on the system. And legally speaking, there's no reason why properties couldn't be added. We seem to have plenty of room, but there's a political question, there's a cost question for those who run the system. It would be good to have a plan, put it that way. And I think phase 2 can help us deliver that plan.
What is the First Nations consultation that has to be done?
You basically send the, I think it was it the draft version you sent, or was it the?
Approve it with the condition that First Nations consultation is conducted in the.
Yes. Before you send it to the ministry, you do the First Nation consultation, which essentially is you can involve them in the process, or invite them to be involved in the process. And with the draft products, you can send it out for their feedback. And you just have to demonstrate that you have done that. It's the same with the boundary expansion. Maybe we've been a little deficient on that, on the boundary expansion, and we have to do a little bit more. So it's basically just demonstrate that we've given them every opportunity to comment and provide feedback and be involved if they wish to be.
They're a consultant, that's not the bands.
No, it's just making sure that you send invitations and draft documents to the appropriate list. Not long after I got here, I went to the Ministry of Forests to get their list, because that in the North Island, that was how we did it. And it's a huge exhaustive list for this area, because there's so many overlapping traditional territories. And when I saw that and compared it to where we sent our boundary expansion to, I could see we were a little short. And that's something we have to rectify. So finding something that's satisfactory is important. I think it was about 5 different contacts that we sent the final version to.
Right.
And I think the Ministry of Environment was satisfied with that.
That's good news. So we'll keep us up to date on where we should go from here. So we have budgeted for the financial plan, and well, I guess without putting out the request for expressions of interest, we don't have a clue whether what we've budgeted will cover that.
I mean, we have room within our gas tax allocation to do that, although I don't want to deplete what we have there too much. I mean, it's important, from what I understand of this process, phase 2 is actually the really important phase, and it's important that we get that part right. And that's been my worry since I saw phase 1. You have to find a way to get to the multi-million-dollar solution if that's what's required. So $5 to $10 million capital works projects, pretty steep for a tax base of our size. And there are incremental approaches that I think could help get us there. So,
Any other comments, questions? All right. The last thing I'd like to ask is, are we at a point yet, or are you at a point yet where you feel comfortable putting numbers on so we know how much we're going to have
for the next one, I'm going to try and get. I'm going to get that to you for the next one, so to give you some idea of where we're going.
Right. So whether we have to start paring down
a bit more.
Right.
I mean, there is a chance that we will have to pare down some more. I do have a number. I'll brief you at the in-camera meeting next week on our negotiations with the province on certain subjects, and I have some comfort that we can establish a line item there that won't do us too much harm this year.
All right. And if there's no further business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Holland. All those in favor? All those in favor? Or did you want to wait?
I'll wait till the meeting's adjourned.
Oh, okay. So the meeting is